You're telling me humans don't even have proper shielding on their vessels? Admiral Krasithul, compound eyes widening as the display showed Earth's pathetic excuse for a space navy. Those tin cans wouldn't survive 10 seconds against a Dravari scout ship. Lieutenant Dexmore, intelligence officer of the Galactic Hegemony's 8th Conquest Fleet, flicked his antennae in confirmation. Yes, Admiral. Their most advanced warship, the UNS Indomitable, has hull plating that wouldn't stop a civilian mining laser. And their weapon systems? Primitive chemical propellants and nuclear warheads. No phase cannons, no quantum torpedoes, not even basic graviton beams. The bridge of the Hegemony's flagship Inevitable Dominance erupted in chittering laughter. Admiral Krasithul's mandibles clicked rapidly in amusement, the Xeno equivalent of slapping his knee. And they call themselves a spacefaring species. Barely out of their gravity well and already thinking they can stand among the stars. The Admiral's compound eyes gleamed with predatory anticipation. This conquest will be the easiest in my 300 cycles of service. Lieutenant Dexmore hesitated, his claw hovering over the holographic controls. There is one peculiarity about these humans, Admiral. Oh? Krasithul's mandibles stilled. They've been broadcasting their presence into space for over 2 centuries now, actively trying to contact alien life. The bridge crew exchanged confused glances, their exoskeletons clicking softly as they shifted in their command pods. What kind of species advertises their location to potential predators? Asked Commander Vexlar, tactical officer and second in command. Admiral Krasithul waved a dismissive claw. A foolish one. Or perhaps they're so primitive they don't understand the concept of conquest. Either way, their world is resource-rich and strategically positioned. The hegemony has claimed it, and claim it we shall. He rose from his command pod, towering 9 feet tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the bridge lights. Prepare the invasion fleet. We'll establish orbit around their homeworld and demand unconditional surrender. If they resist, which these primitives inevitably do, we'll deploy the standard protocol. Tactical strikes on their largest population centers until they submit. Yes, Admiral, the bridge crew responded in unison. As the massive hegemony armada accelerated toward the Sol system, Admiral Krasithul allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Another conquest for his record, another primitive species to serve the greater glory of the hegemony. This humanity would soon learn their place in the grand scheme of the universe, at the bottom of the galactic food chain. Little did he know that humans had a peculiar talent for defying expectations. Captain James Reeves of the United Nations Space Command stared at the long-range sensor data with an expression that could only be described as profoundly unimpressed. So let me get this straight, he said, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. An alien armada of 117 warships is heading straight for Earth, and they're not even trying to hide it? Lieutenant Commander Alex Reed nodded, his fingers dancing across the holographic display. Yes, sir. They're broadcasting on all frequencies, too. Our linguistics team is working on the translation, but the general message seems to be surrender or die. Pretty standard stuff, actually. Standard? Reeves raised an eyebrow. Well, if you've read any science fiction from the last 300 years, yeah. Reed shrugged. Apparently, reality has a limited imagination. Reeves snorted. And what's their ETA? At current velocity, they'll reach Earth orbit in 72 hours. The captain nodded thoughtfully, then tapped his comm unit. Reeves to Admiral Wilson. A gruff voice answered almost immediately. Wilson here. I'm assuming this is about our uninvited guests? Yes, sir. Request permission to execute Protocol Trojan Horse. There was a brief pause on the line. Are you sure that's necessary, Captain? These folks might just be dropping by to say hello. Reed coughed to hide a laugh. They're broadcasting surrender demands in advance, Admiral, Reeves replied dryly. I don't think they're coming for a diplomatic brunch. Fair point. Permission granted. I'll inform the Security Council. Wilson out. Reeves turned to his XO with a grin that would make a shark reconsider its life choices. Well, Commander Reed, looks like we're about to give our new friends a proper human welcome. Reed's answering smile was equally predatory. Should I feel sorry for them, sir? Ask me again in 72 hours. The Hegemony invasion fleet dropped out of FTL on the edge of the Sol system, their massive ships casting long shadows across the void. Admiral Krasithul stood before the main viewport, admiring the blue-white gem of Earth in the distance. Status report, he commanded. Lieutenant Dexmore consulted his console. Scans confirm minimal defensive capabilities, Admiral. They have a small number of orbital platforms, likely weapons systems, and a handful of those primitive warships we observed. They appear to be marshalling their fleet near their moon. A futile gesture, Commander Vexlar commented. They must recognize the futility of resistance. And yet they resist anyway, Krasthul mused. Fascinating in a primitive sort of way, like watching prey species fight back against their natural predators. He turned to his communications officer. Broadcast our demands again. Full surrender, immediate disarmament, and preparation for integration into the hegemony. Give them 6 hours to comply before we begin targeting their population centers. Yes, Admiral. As the message was transmitted toward Earth, Krasthul settled back into his command pod. 6 hours was generous by hegemony standards. Most species were given merely 1. But he was curious about these humans. Their pitiful technology suggested a backward civilization, yet something about their behavior intrigued him. What kind of species would face certain defeat yet prepare to fight anyway? Perhaps they would make interesting slaves after all. In the White House Situation Room, the United Nations Security Council had convened an emergency session via holographic conference. The room buzzed with tension as military officers, diplomats, and intelligence analysts reviewed the latest data on the alien armada. President Elizabeth Morrison sat at the head of the table, her expression stern but composed. So, Admiral Wilson, you're telling me that Captain Reeves wants to implement Protocol Trojan Horse? Admiral Wilson, a tall, imposing figure with dark skin and silver hair, nodded. Yes, Madam President, and I've given my approval. Care to explain to our international colleagues what exactly that entails? She asked, gesturing to the holographic representatives of various world powers. Wilson tapped a command into the table's surface, bringing up a detailed tactical display. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 70 years, humanity has maintained 2 separate space programs. The public one, consisting of our visible fleet, the lunar and Mars colonies, and our mining operations in the asteroid belt, was designed to appear deliberately underwhelming. The Russian president leaned forward, his holographic form flickering slightly. You mean we've been sandbagging? Wilson's lips twitched. That's one way to put it, sir. Yes. Since the Great Reform of 2078, when the major powers agreed to unified space exploration, we've been operating under the sheep in wolf's clothing doctrine, or rather, its inverse. Wolf in sheep's clothing, the Chinese premier corrected with a faint smile. Precisely. Our visible fleet was designed to look functional but relatively primitive. Basic weapon systems, limited FTL capabilities, modest defenses. The kind of technology you'd expect from a young spacefaring species. The British Prime Minister's hologram adjusted her glasses. And the second space program? In response, Wilson expanded the tactical display to show the dark side of the moon and the space beyond Neptune. Red dots began to appear, dozens of them, then hundreds. This, he said simply, is humanity's real fleet. Even President Morrison looked shocked. My God, Wilson, how many ships are we talking about? 2,375 warships of various classes, ma'am. Plus support vessels, carriers, and automated defense platforms. All equipped with our actual level of technology, not the watered-down version we've been parading around the solar system. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. You're telling me, the French president finally said, that we've been maintaining a shadow fleet more than 20 times the size of our public one? How did you keep this secret? Admiral Wilson shrugged. The same way governments have always kept secrets. Need-to-know basis, compartmentalized information, and a healthy budget for black ops. The shipyards are primarily located in the Kuiper Belt, with additional facilities in the asteroid belt disguised as mining operations. And the crews? Asked the Japanese Prime Minister. Officially assigned to deep space research missions, extended tours on Mars, or classified projects. In reality, they've been training and serving on our actual fleet. President Morrison rubbed her temples. So what exactly is Protocol Trojan Horse? Admiral Wilson's expression turned grim. It's quite simple, Madam President. We let them come to us, believing we're defenseless. We put up just enough of a fight with our public fleet to seem legitimate. And when they're committed to their attack, he made a closing gesture with his fist. We spring the trap. Admiral Krasthul watched with growing irritation as the deadline for Earth's surrender came and went without response. They're ignoring us, he growled, mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. Commander Vexlar approached, offering a datapad. Not exactly, Admiral. They've responded with this message. Krasthul took the pad, eyes scanning the translated text. To the commander of the approaching alien fleet. The nations of Earth have received your communication and considered your demands. Our response is as follows. Earth and humanity will never surrender to threats of violence. We stand ready to defend our homeworld. However, we are also prepared to establish peaceful diplomatic relations if you reconsider your hostile approach. The choice is yours. For a moment, the bridge was silent. Then Krazathul began to laugh, a harsh, chittering sound that made his subordinates step back instinctively. The audacity! The sheer, primitive audacity! He tossed the pad back to Vexlar. They think they can negotiate with the hegemony? With ships that couldn't survive a meteor shower? He turned to his tactical officer. Target their largest population center. I believe it's called Tokyo. And prepare to fire a demonstration shot. Let's see how quickly their tone changes when a few million of their species are vaporized. Sir, Dexmore interrupted. Their defensive fleet is moving to intercept 27 vessels, arranging themselves in a defensive formation between us and their planet. Krasthul's compound eyes gleamed with anticipation. Excellent. They wish to die with honor. We shall grant them that small dignity. Battle stations! Prepare to engage the human fleet. The massive hegemony warships surged forward, weapons systems powering up as they closed the distance to Earth. On the view screen, the tiny human vessels looked like insects compared to the hegemony's mighty warships. This won't even qualify as a battle, Vexlar observed with disdain. More like pest control. Krazathul settled into his command pod, mandibles clicking in amusement. Begin the conquest. Aboard the UNS Indomitable, Captain Reeves watched the approaching alien armada with calculated calm. They're taking the bait, he noted as the enemy fleet accelerated toward their position. All ships maintain formation. Remember, we need to make this look good, but not too good. Acknowledgements came in from the captains of the other vessels in Earth's last line of defense. Weapons status? Reeves asked. Lieutenant Commander Reed checked his console. All weapons online, operating at public capability levels, which is to say embarrassingly underpowered. Perfect, Reeves grinned. Shield status? Shields at pathetically inadequate levels, sir. Just as planned. Excellent. The captain leaned back in his chair, surprisingly relaxed for a man about to face an overwhelming alien armada. And our real-time feed to the Shadow Fleet? Transmitting on quantum channels, sir. They're seeing everything we see. Reeves nodded with satisfaction. Then let's put on a show, shall we? Fire a warning shot. Make it look like we're trying our best. The Indomitable shuddered slightly as it launched a primitive nuclear missile toward the approaching aliens. Now we wait, Reeves said softly. And pray these bugs have never heard of the Trojan horse. Admiral Krazathul could barely contain his contempt as he watched the human missile approach. They're firing nuclear weapons at us, he said incredulously. Actual fission-based explosives. I haven't seen those used in warfare since my great-grandfather's time. Shall I intercept, Admiral? Asked the weapons officer. Krazathul waved a dismissive claw. Don't bother. Let it hit our shields. I want them to see how futile their resistance truly is. The missile struck the forward shields of the inevitable dominance, creating a brief flare of light that quickly dissipated. Shield status? Krazathul asked, already knowing the answer. Shields at 99.98%, Admiral. The impact was barely registered. The Admiral rose from his command pod, mandibles spread wide in what passed for a smile among his species. Target their lead vessel and fire a single shot from our tertiary weapons array. Let's show them the difference between their technology and ours. A beam of concentrated energy lanced out from the hegemony flagship, striking the Indomitable directly. The human vessel rocked violently, atmosphere venting from multiple hull breaches. Minimal damage to their ship, reported the tactical officer, sounding almost disappointed. Their hull integrity is compromised, but they remain operational. As expected, Krazathul clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. They're more durable than they look. No matter. Proceed with the attack pattern. Destroy their fleet, then move into orbit for planetary bombardment. The hegemony fleet spread out into an attack formation, weapons charging as they closed the distance to Earth's defensive line. Hull breach on decks 4 through 7, shouted the damage control officer as the Indomitable rocked from the alien weapon impact. Emergency force fields holding, but just barely. Captain Reeves gripped the arms of his command chair, playing his part convincingly. Return fire! All ships, engage at will! Earth's small fleet began firing a barrage of missiles and energy weapons, most of which dissipated harmlessly against the hegemony shields. We're barely scratching them, sir, Reed reported grimly. I know, Reeves replied through gritted teeth. Just keep firing. We need to hold their attention for another 3 minutes. The alien fleet continued its advance, their massive ships dwarfing the human vessels. Beams of energy sliced through space, cutting into Earth's defenders with surgical precision. UN's Defiant reports critical damage, the communications officer announced. They're abandoning ship. UNS Resolute has lost engines and weapons. They're dead in the water. UN's Valiant destroyed, sir. No survivors detected. The reports continued as, one by one, Earth's visible defense fleet was decimated by the overwhelming alien force. Captain Reeves listened to each with a stoic expression, occasionally giving orders to fire back or adjust their position, but never showing panic. Reed leaned close to his captain. "Sir, we've passed the 3-minute mark." Reeves allowed himself a small, predatory smile. "About damn time. Signal the fleet." Reed tapped a sequence into his console. Not the standard communications array, but a hidden quantum transmitter. The message was simple, a single word. "Checkmate." Admiral Korrath Thul was beginning to feel almost bored as his fleet methodically dismantled the human defenses. Their ships were falling one after another, offering pathetic resistance against the hegemony's superior technology. "This is almost disappointing," he commented to Commander Vexlar. "I expected at least some challenge." "Perhaps their bravado was just that, Admiral. Empty words." "Perhaps. Still, Admiral." Lieutenant Dexmoor's urgent voice cut through the conversation. "Sensors are detecting spatial distortions at multiple points around our fleet." Korrath Thul's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Spatial distortions? What kind?" "Unknown, sir, but they're massive and growing. Energy signatures unlike anything in our database." Before the Admiral could respond, the space around the hegemony fleet rippled. Like water disturbed by a thrown stone, the very fabric of reality seemed to bulge and flex. And then, with a flash of blinding light, ships began to appear. Not one or two, but hundreds, then more. Emerging from what appeared to be folded space itself, a vast armada of vessels materialized, surrounding the hegemony fleet in a 3-dimensional sphere of overwhelming firepower. These were not the primitive tin cans they had been fighting. These ships were sleek, advanced, and unmistakably built for war. They gleamed with a dark metallic luster that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their designs were angular and predatory, like oceanic hunters evolved for the void of space. And there were thousands of them. "Impossible," Korrath Thul whispered, his compound eyes wide with shock. This can't be." "Admiral." Dexmoor's voice shook slightly. "We're being hailed by the largest vessel in their fleet." Korrath Thul stared at the tactical display, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The hegemony fleet, his mighty invasion force that had conquered 17 worlds, was now completely surrounded. Outnumbered more than 20 to 1. "Put it through," he managed, mandibles clicking rapidly in distress. The main view screen flickered, and a human face appeared. Not the face of Captain Reeves from the ship they'd nearly destroyed, but an older human with dark skin and silver hair, wearing an immaculate uniform adorned with numerous insignia of rank. "This is Admiral Thomas Wilson of the Earth Defense Force Shadow Fleet," the human announced, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. "I believe you were expecting us to surrender." Admiral Wilson's face remained impassive as he regarded the alien commander on his view screen. The insectoid creature seemed to be in a state of shock, its mandibles clicking rapidly in what Wilson's xenobiology experts had identified as an expression of extreme stress. This is impossible," the alien finally managed. "Our intelligence indicated your species possessed only primitive space technology." Wilson allowed himself a small smile. "Yes. That was rather the point, Admiral." "Korrath Thul," the alien responded automatically, still clearly struggling to process the situation. "Admiral Korrath Thul, I must commend your intelligence services. They found exactly what we wanted them to find." Wilson leaned forward slightly. "You see, humanity has been aware of the broader galactic community for quite some time. We've observed how the hegemony treats primitive species, so we made a strategic decision to appear weaker than we are." On the tactical display beside him, Wilson could see the Shadow Fleet completing its encirclement of the hegemony forces. 2,375 warships, ranging from rapid attack frigates to massive dreadnoughts, all equipped with humanity's actual level of technology, not the watered-down version they showed to the galaxy. "A deception," Korrath Thul clicked, mandibles now moving in what seemed like growing anger. "A trap, precisely," Wilson confirmed, "though I prefer to think of it as a necessary precaution. Humanity has a long history of being underestimated, Admiral. It rarely ends well for those who make that mistake." He gestured to someone off-screen, and the tactical feed was shared with the hegemony vessel. Wilson watched with satisfaction as Korrath Thul's compound eyes widened at the complete tactical situation. His fleet utterly surrounded, with targeting locks from multiple human vessels on each of his ships. "Now then," Wilson continued, his tone shifting from conversational to commanding, "let's discuss your surrender." Admiral Korrath Thul had never experienced anything like this in his 300 cycles of military service. Surrounded, outgunned, and completely outmaneuvered by a species his intelligence had classified as primitive. "This is some kind of trick," he hissed to his tactical officer. Scan those ships. They must be holograms, or... I've completed multiple scan patterns, Admiral, Vexlar replied, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. They're real. And their weapons, the energy signatures are unlike anything in our database. Orders of magnitude more advanced than our own. On the view screen, the human admiral waited patiently, as if he had all the time in the world. And, Krazathul realized with mounting horror, he did. What are our options? He asked quietly. Commander Vexlar's antennae drooped slightly. We are surrounded on all vectors, Admiral. Even if we could break through their line at one point, the rest of their fleet would cut us to pieces before we could escape. And their weapons. Based on preliminary analysis, a single one of their larger vessels could likely destroy 3 of ours in direct combat. I don't mean to rush you, Admiral Krazathul. The human's voice came through the speakers again. But I do require your answer. Will you surrender your fleet, or shall we demonstrate our actual military capabilities more directly? Krazathul's mandibles clicked rapidly as he considered his options. The hegemony had never surrendered to an inferior species. It would be unprecedented, humiliating. But they had never faced a situation like this before. Never walked into such a perfectly executed trap. If I refuse? He asked, already knowing the answer. The human's expression remained neutral. Then we will open fire and destroy your fleet. We have targeted your engines and life support systems to minimize casualties. But make no mistake, we will defend our world with all necessary force. Krazathul turned to look at his bridge crew. These were not just subordinates. They were the finest officers in the hegemony, veterans of countless campaigns. And now they looked to him to make an impossible decision. Lower our shields, he finally said, the words almost physically painful to pronounce. Deactivate weapon systems. I surrender my fleet to Earth forces. The human admiral nodded once. A wise decision, Admiral. Maintain your current position. Our boarding teams will arrive shortly to secure your vessels. Admiral Wilson out. As the transmission ended, the bridge of the inevitable dominance fell into stunned silence. What happens now? Lieutenant Dexmore finally asked, his voice small. Admiral Krazathul stared at the tactical display, at the overwhelming human fleet surrounding his own. Now? He clicked his mandibles softly. Now we learn what it means to underestimate humanity. Captain Reeves watched from the battered bridge of the Indomitable as the Shadow Fleet's boarding parties deployed toward the hegemony vessels. Despite the damage to his ship and the losses they'd sustained in the defensive action, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride at how perfectly the operation had unfolded. Message from Admiral Wilson, sir, Reed announced. He says, and I quote, "Nice acting job, James. You had them completely fooled." Reeves chuckled. Tell him the damage to my ship feels a little too authentic for my taste, but I appreciate the compliment. As the crew worked to stabilize the Indomitable's systems, Reeves reflected on the culmination of decades of planning. Protocol Trojan Horse had been conceived almost 50 years ago, when humanity's deep space listening posts first detected the hegemony's communications and learned of their practice of conquering primitive species. Rather than announcing their discovery to the galaxy, Earth's leaders had made the strategic decision to present 2 faces to the stars. The public one, seemingly vulnerable and technologically modest, and the shadow one, advanced and powerful beyond what any potential invader might expect. They had maintained the deception meticulously, building their real fleet in secret, developing technologies that leapfrogged conventional development paths, and preparing for the day when someone would inevitably come to conquer the apparently defenseless Earth. Boarding parties report hegemony crews are complying with surrender terms, Reed reported, breaking into Reeves's thoughts. No resistance so far? Good, Reeves nodded. What's the status of our fleet? Reed's expression sobered. 7 ships destroyed, sir. 11 with significant damage, including us. Casualty reports are still coming in, but it's going to be in the hundreds. Reeves closed his eyes briefly. They had known there would be losses, real losses, in the initial engagement. The deception had to be convincing, which meant that Earth's visible fleet had to fight as if they truly were humanity's last line of defense. The men and women aboard those ships had volunteered for what amounted to a suicide mission, knowing their sacrifice would help ensure humanity's survival. Make sure their names are recorded properly, Reeves said quietly. They died making history today. Yes, sir. Reed hesitated, then added, Admiral Wilson is requesting your presence at the formal surrender ceremony. A shuttle will dock with us in 20 minutes. Reeves raised an eyebrow. Formal surrender, that's unexpected. Apparently the Admiral feels it's important for diplomatic reasons. The hegemony needs to understand exactly who they tried to conquer. Fair enough. Reeves straightened his uniform, grimacing at the burn mark on one sleeve. I suppose I should look presentable for our first official alien diplomatic function. Reed grinned. Just be yourself, sir. After all, you're the face that launched 1,000 ships, or rather 2,375 of them. The formal surrender took place in the cavernous hangar bay of the EDF Reckoning, the flagship of humanity's Shadow Fleet. Admiral Korrath Thule and his senior officers were escorted into the space by a human honor guard, their compound eyes taking in the vast chamber with poorly concealed awe. The hangar had been transformed for the occasion. A long table sat in the center, with the human delegation already seated on one side. Admiral Wilson sat in the middle, flanked by Captain Reeves and various military and civilian officials. Behind them stood rows of officers and diplomatic representatives from Earth's nations. As Korrath Thule approached the table, he couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between this vessel and the human ships his fleet had engaged earlier. Where those had been utilitarian and basic, this ship hummed with advanced technology. The very walls seemed alive with subtle energy patterns, and the artificial gravity was so perfectly calibrated that it felt entirely natural. "Admiral Korrath Thule," Wilson greeted him with a formal nod. "Please, be seated." The insectoid commander and his officers took their places opposite the human delegation. For a moment, there was silence as the two species regarded each other across the table. "Before we begin," Wilson said, "I believe introductions are in order. You know me, and this is Captain James Reeves of the UNS Indomitable, the ship your forces engaged directly." Korrath Thule's mandibles clicked in recognition as he regarded Reeves. "Your vessel fought bravely, Captain, though I now understand it was a performance." Reeves inclined his head slightly. "Part performance, part necessity, Admiral. The ships you encountered were real, as were our casualties." "A high price for deception," Korrath Thule observed. "A necessary one," Wilson countered. "Now, to business. The terms of your surrender are straightforward. Your fleet will be escorted out of the Sol system under our supervision. You will return to hegemony space and deliver a message from Earth to your leadership." "And that message is?" Korrath Thule asked, mandibles twitching slightly. Wilson leaned forward, his expression intense. "Earth is not to be trifled with. We are not the primitive species you believed us to be, and any further aggression against our world or our colonies will be met with overwhelming force." He paused, then continued in a slightly softer tone. "However, we are also open to establishing diplomatic relations with the hegemony on equal terms. We have no desire for conquest or expansion at your expense. We simply wish to be left in peace to develop our civilization our own way." Korrath Thule seemed to consider this for a moment, his alien features difficult for the humans to read. "And my fleet, my crews, will be allowed to return home intact," Wilson confirmed. "We're not barbarians, Admiral. We don't take prisoners of war when alternatives exist, nor do we execute surrendered enemies. That said, we will be keeping one of your vessels for study. A fair exchange, I think, for your unprovoked attack on our world." The hegemony admiral's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation, the human xenobiologists had explained. "The High Command will not be pleased with this outcome." "I imagine not," Wilson agreed, "but they might be interested in the alternative." He nodded to an aide who activated a holographic display above the table. It showed a simulation of what would have happened had the battle continued. The systematic destruction of the hegemony fleet by Earth's superior forces. "We could have annihilated your entire fleet," Wilson said matter-of-factly. "Instead, we're allowing you to return home with valuable intelligence about a species the hegemony clearly underestimated. I'd call that a diplomatic gesture." Korrath Thule's compound eyes fixed on the simulation, watching as virtual versions of his ships exploded one after another under the human onslaught. After a long moment, he looked back at Wilson. "I will deliver your message," he said finally, "but I cannot guarantee how the High Command will respond." Wilson smiled thinly. "We're counting on your eloquence, Admiral. Make them understand what happened here today, and what will happen if they try again." 3 months later, Captain Reeves stood in the observation lounge of the newly repaired UNS Indomitable, watching as the first official diplomatic delegation from the galactic hegemony approached Earth. Unlike the invasion fleet, this was a single vessel, sleek, obviously designed for speed rather than war, and broadcasting peaceful intentions on all frequencies. "Nervous?" asked Reed, coming to stand beside his captain. Reeves shook his head, curious more than anything. "I wonder if they'll send our friend Korrath Thule." "Not likely," Reed replied with a small smile. "Word is, he's been reassigned to some backwater outpost on the edge of hegemony space. Apparently, surrendering to a primitive species isn't great for one's career prospects. Even when the alternative was total destruction? Especially then, I'd imagine. Pride is a funny thing, even among aliens." They watched in companionable silence as the diplomatic vessel was escorted into orbit by a small contingent of Shadow Fleet ships. no longer hiding their capabilities, but not flaunting them either. A delicate balance of power and restraint. You know, Reeves said thoughtfully, in all of human history, I can't think of a first contact scenario that went quite like this. Reed chuckled. What, you mean where aliens tried to conquer us, and we revealed we were actually far more advanced than we appeared, turning the tables completely and forcing them to come back hat in hand for proper diplomacy? Exactly that. Well, sir, humanity has always had a flair for the dramatic. Reeves smiled as the alien ship settled into orbit, its elegant form silhouetted against Earth's blue backdrop. That we have, Commander, that we have. In the grand scheme of the galaxy, humanity was still a young species, taking its first tentative steps into the cosmic community. But as the events of the past months had shown, they were not to be underestimated. They had faced their first interstellar threat not with panic or desperation, but with careful planning, strategic foresight, and just a touch of theatrical flair. And if the galactic hegemony or any other spacefaring power ever forgot that lesson, humanity's real fleet would be there to remind them. Because if there was one thing that had become abundantly clear to the wider galaxy, it was this. Humanity? Fuck yeah. End. The Price of Being Right. Episode 2. You know what I hate about being right all the time? Jake said, watching the newsfeed scroll across his datapad while nursing what had to be his 5th cup of Synthicaf that morning. It's that nobody ever wants to hear, I told you so, even when you really, really want to say it. Pip looked up from where he was fine-tuning the Lucky Strike's new quantum field generators, a gift from the Zephyrian Empire that had turned their humble cargo hauler into something that could probably outrun half the Imperial Navy. Are we talking about the Senate hearings again? We're always talking about the Senate hearings, Jake replied, scrolling through another article about the ongoing investigation into the Intelligence Division conspiracy. 3 weeks of testimony, 16 different species represented, and somehow the conclusion is that humans are potentially destabilizing to galactic peace. Well, Pip said, his ears twitching in what Jake had learned to recognize as diplomatic caution. We did expose a multi-species conspiracy, bring down an entire intelligence network, and cause the resignation of 4 high-ranking Imperial officials. We also saved lives and prevented what amounted to genocide, Jake pointed out. But apparently that's less important than the fact that we made some politicians look bad. The truth was, Jake was getting tired of being a celebrity. The whole Heroes of the Galaxy thing had worn thin about 2 days after it started, when reporters began camping outside their docking bay and asking increasingly stupid questions about human psychology and whether Earth was planning some kind of galactic expansion. The irony wasn't lost on him that in exposing a conspiracy about humans being dangerous, they'd somehow convinced half the galaxy that humans actually were dangerous. Sir, came a voice from the ship's comm system. There's someone here to see you. Jake frowned. They weren't expecting anyone, and after the last 3 weeks of unwanted attention, they'd been pretty clear about not taking unscheduled visitors. Who is it, Rex? Rex was their new security chief, a Vorthak mercenary who looked like someone had crossed a bear with a tank and given it anger management issues. Korrath had insisted on hiring him after the 3rd assassination attempt, and Jake had to admit the guy was good at his job. Says his name is Admiral Voss, Terran Colonial Navy. Has proper credentials and everything. Jake and Pip exchanged glances. The Terran Colonial Navy was Earth's contribution to galactic defense, and admirals didn't usually make house calls unless something very important was happening. Send him up, Jake said, but keep an eye on him. Always do, sir. 5 minutes later, Jake was face to face with a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a recruitment poster for humans, more dangerous than they appear. Admiral Voss was tall, gray-haired, and carried himself with the kind of military bearing that suggested he could probably kill someone with a paperclip if the situation called for it. Captain Hendricks, Voss said, extending a hand. Admiral David Voss, TCN, I've been following your recent adventures. I bet you have, Jake replied, shaking the offered hand. What can we do for you, Admiral? Actually, it's more about what I can do for you. May I sit? Jake gestured to one of the cargo containers they'd been using as makeshift furniture. The Lucky Strike wasn't exactly designed for formal meetings, but it was home. I'll get straight to the point, Voss said, settling onto the container with surprising grace for someone his size. Earth has been watching the fallout from your actions with considerable interest. The political ramifications have been significant. Good significant or bad significant? Pip asked. Both. On one hand, You've exposed a genuine threat to human interests, and potentially saved thousands of lives. On the other hand, you've also confirmed every paranoid fantasy that certain species have had about human unpredictability and resourcefulness. Jake sipped his synthcaf, which had gone cold while he wasn't paying attention. And Earth's official position is? Officially, we're proud of our citizens who acted with courage and integrity in the face of overwhelming odds. Voss smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Unofficially, we're concerned about the precedent this sets and the attention it's brought to humanity's growing influence in galactic affairs. Meaning? Meaning that there are forces in the galaxy who were already suspicious of human expansion, and recent events have given them ammunition to argue for containment measures. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of containment measures? Trade restrictions, limits on human settlement in contested systems, proposals to restrict human access to certain types of technology. Voss leaned forward slightly. There's even been talk of establishing monitoring stations in human-controlled space. That's... Pip started, then stopped, his ears drooping. That's basically treating humans like a threat species. Exactly. Which is why Earth has a proposition for you. Jake set down his cup, suddenly very alert. I'm listening. We want to offer you a commission in the Terran Colonial Navy. Both of you, actually. Captain Hendricks, you'd be given command of a new type of vessel. Something designed specifically for the kind of unconventional operations that seem to follow you around. And Mr. Pip would serve as your chief technical officer, with full access to our most advanced engineering resources. Jake looked at Pip, who was practically vibrating with excitement at the mention of advanced engineering resources. What's the catch? Jake asked. The catch is that you'd be working directly for Earth, not the Zephyrian Empire. Your mission would be to demonstrate that humans can be trusted partners in galactic security rather than unpredictable wildcards. By doing what exactly? Voss smiled, and this time it did reach his eyes. By continuing to do exactly what you've been doing. Helping people, solving problems, and proving that humans are more interested in making friends than conquering enemies. And if we say no? Then you continue operating as independent contractors, which is certainly your right. But you should be aware that the political climate is changing. Independent human operators are facing increasing scrutiny, and there have already been several incidents of harassment and intimidation. Jake frowned. What kind of incidents? Cargo inspections that turn into 6-hour ordeals. Permit delays that strand ships in port for weeks. Random security sweeps that somehow always target human vessels. Voss's expression grew serious. Nothing overtly illegal, but a clear pattern of making life difficult for humans who operate outside established power structures. That's harassment, Pip said indignantly. Yes, it is. And it's only going to get worse unless something changes the narrative about human intentions in galactic affairs. Jake stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the bustling traffic around Nexus Station. Ships from dozens of different species moved in carefully orchestrated patterns, a testament to the cooperation that made galactic civilization possible. But how much of that cooperation was based on trust, and how much was based on mutual fear? What kind of ship are we talking about? He asked finally. Something new. Officially, it's designated as a diplomatic reconnaissance vessel, but it's got capabilities that would make a Zephyrian cruiser jealous. Fast, well-armed, and equipped with the kind of technology that usually requires a security clearance to even look at. And our mission would be? Officially, diplomatic outreach and security consultation. Unofficially, clean up the messes that other people can't or won't handle. Show the galaxy that humans are the kind of neighbors they want to have. Jake turned back to face the Admiral. And if we run into another conspiracy, another group that thinks humans need to be contained? Voss's smile turned predatory. Then you deal with it the same way you dealt with the last one. Quickly, efficiently, and with extreme prejudice toward anyone who threatens innocent people. Pip cleared his throat. Admiral? What exactly would my role be in all this? Whatever Captain Hendricks needs it to be. Chief Engineer, Technical Specialist, Senior Advisor on Non-Human Psychology, your choice. What you wouldn't be is overlooked or undervalued because of your size or species. And we'd have actual resources, not just whatever we can scrounge up or jury-rig. Mr. Pip, you'd have access to technology that most species haven't even theorized about yet. Earth has been busy in the years since we joined the galactic community. Jake looked at his friend, seeing the excitement warring with caution in those enormous eyes. Pip had always been brilliant, but he'd also always been overlooked, dismissed as just another small, anxious engineer. The idea of working with cutting-edge technology, of finally getting the recognition he deserved. Can we think about it? Jake asked. Of course. But I should mention that time is somewhat of a factor. There's a situation developing that would be perfect for your particular skill set. What kind of situation? Voss pulled out a datapad and activated a holographic display. The image showed a star system Jake didn't recognize, with several inhabited planets and what looked like a major shipping hub. The Kepler Junction, Voss said. Major trade route intersection, home to about 30 million beings from 24 different species. 3 days ago, ships started disappearing. Pirates? Pip asked. That was the initial assumption. But the pattern is unusual. No demands for ransom, no debris fields, no survivors. Ships go in, they don't come out. Jake studied the display. How many ships? 17 so far, including 3 with human crews. And local authorities? Overwhelmed. The Kepler Junction is technically neutral space, administered by a council of local governments. They've got about as much military capability as a shopping mall security force. What about the major powers? Surely someone's interested in keeping the trade routes open. Voss's expression grew grim. That's the problem. The Zephyrian Empire is claiming it's a human piracy operation. The Vorthak Confederacy is blaming Zephyrian military exercises. The Centauri Republic thinks it's some kind of Vorthak Black Ops program. And everybody's too busy pointing fingers to actually investigate. Exactly. Meanwhile, ships keep disappearing, trade is grinding to a halt, and tensions are escalating toward what could become a shooting war. Jake sat back down, his mind already working through the implications. You want us to go in and figure out what's really happening. I want you to go in and solve the problem. Quietly, efficiently, and in a way that demonstrates human competence and reliability. And if it turns out to be another conspiracy, then you expose it and bring the people responsible to justice. Just like last time. Pip looked up from where he'd been studying the technical specifications on Voss's datapad. This ship you're offering, it really has quantum phase modulators? Among other things. And a full fabrication bay with molecular assemblers? Standard equipment. Pip's ears perked up so fast. Jake was surprised they didn't make a sound. Jake, we have to take this job. Pip, we don't have to do anything. We've got our own company now, remember? We can pick and choose our contracts. But think about it. A real ship with real resources and a mission that actually matters. We could make a real difference. Jake looked at his friend, then at Admiral Voss, who was watching their conversation with the kind of patience that suggested he'd already known what the outcome would be. What's the timeline? Jake asked. We can have you aboard your new ship within 6 hours. Fully briefed and equipped within 12. At the Kepler Junction within 48 hours. That's fast. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. Every day we wait, more ships disappear and tensions escalate. Jake stood up and walked to the viewport again, looking out at the vast expanse of space beyond the station. Somewhere out there, people were in danger. Ships were disappearing, families were losing loved ones, and the major powers were too busy playing politics to do anything about it. It was exactly the kind of situation that had gotten them into trouble in the first place. It was also exactly the kind of situation they'd proven they were good at handling. All right, he said finally. We'll take the job, but I have conditions. Name them. First, we operate with complete autonomy. No micromanagement from Earth, no political interference, no orders to back down if things get complicated. Agreed. Second, Pip gets full access to everything. No classified restrictions, no need-to-know limitations. If we're going to do this job, we do it with complete information. Also agreed. And third, if we find another conspiracy, we expose it completely. No cover-ups, no diplomatic considerations, no protecting people just because they're politically connected. Voss was quiet for a moment, and Jake could see him weighing political realities against operational necessities. Agreed, he said finally. Though I should warn you that complete exposure might make you even more enemies than you already have. Admiral, Jake said, grinning. We're humans. Making enemies is apparently what we do best. In that case, Voss replied, standing up and extending his hand again. Welcome to the Terran Colonial Navy. I have a feeling this is going to be the beginning of a very interesting partnership. As Jake shook the Admiral's hand, he couldn't help but think that they were about to find out just how dangerous humans could really be when they put their minds to it. After all, they'd already proven that they were willing to take on conspiracies, expose corruption, and face impossible odds for the sake of doing what was right. Now they were about to find out what they could accomplish with the full resources of Earth behind them. The galaxy, Jake thought, was about to become a much more interesting place. 6 hours later, Jake stood on the bridge of the TCN Defiance, trying very hard not to gawk like a tourist. The ship was everything Admiral Voss had promised and more. Sleek, fast, and packed with technology that made the void render look like a museum piece. Pip, meanwhile, had disappeared into the engineering section about 5 minutes after boarding and hadn't been seen since. Jake was pretty sure he could hear occasional sounds of rapture coming from that direction, but he'd decided it was probably best not to investigate. "Captain," came a voice from behind him. Jake turned to see a young woman in a crisp Colonial Navy uniform approaching. She was tall, blonde, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that suggested she could probably fly the ship blindfolded if necessary. "Commander Lisa Garrett," she said, extending a hand. "Your executive officer." "Jake Hendricks," he replied, shaking her hand. "Though I guess it's Captain Hendricks now." "Yes, sir. Congratulations on your promotion." Jake looked around the bridge, taking in the gleaming consoles and holographic displays. "I have to admit, this is a bit of an adjustment. Yesterday I was flying a cargo hauler with jury-rigged life support. Today I'm commanding a starship that probably costs more than some planet's entire GDP. The Defiance is a bit special, sir. She's the first of her class, officially designated as a diplomatic reconnaissance vessel, but the specs are closer to a heavy cruiser." "And the crew?" 37 personnel, all volunteers. Mix of Colonial Navy regulars and civilian specialists. Everyone's been briefed on the mission parameters and your unique command style." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Unique command style?" Garrett smiled. "Let's just say that word has gotten around about your tendency to improvise and your willingness to take personal risks for the sake of the mission. Is that going to be a problem?" "Sir, with respect, half the crew requested transfer to this ship specifically because of your reputation. The other half are here because they want to work with the engineer who can allegedly make a broken hyperdrive sing lullabies." "Pip's gonna love that." "Speaking of which, sir, your chief engineer has been asking about something called quantum harmonic resonance dampeners. Do we have any idea what he's talking about?" Jake grinned. "Probably not. But if Pip wants them, we'll figure out how to get them. He's got a tendency to ask for impossible things and then make them work anyway." "Understood, sir. Will you be wanting to address the crew?" Jake thought about it. Traditional naval protocol would call for a formal speech, something about duty and honor and the proud traditions of the service. But Jake had never been much for tradition, and this crew had volunteered to follow him precisely because he wasn't traditional. "Yeah, let's get everyone together. Might as well start as we mean to go on." 20 minutes later, Jake stood in the ship's main assembly area, looking out at 36 faces representing what had to be the most diverse crew in Colonial Navy history. Humans, obviously, but also a Vorthak tactical officer, a Centauri communications specialist, and what looked like a Klezak medical officer, who couldn't have been much older than Pip. "All right, everyone," Jake said, not bothering with a podium or formal presentation. "I'm Jake Hendricks, and I'm your new captain. Most of you probably know the story about what happened with the Intelligence Division conspiracy, so I'll skip the recap and get to the important stuff." He paused, looking around the room. "This ship, this crew, this mission, we're here to prove something. We're here to prove that humans can be trusted partners in galactic security, that we're more interested in helping people than conquering them, that when things go wrong, we're the kind of neighbors you want to have." A few nods from the crowd. "But here's the thing. We're not going to prove that by following protocol or playing it safe. We're going to prove it by doing what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it's dangerous, even when it means making powerful people very, very angry." More nods, and Jake could see grins starting to appear on some faces. "So if you're here because you want a quiet tour of duty with regular promotions and predictable assignments, you're on the wrong ship. But if you're here because you want to make a difference, because you want to be part of something important, because you think the galaxy could use a little more justice and a little less politics." Jake grinned. "Then welcome aboard the Defiance. Let's go save some people." The cheer that went up from the crew was decidedly non-regulation, but Jake figured that was probably appropriate for a ship that was about to operate very much outside normal parameters. As the crew dispersed back to their stations, Commander Garrett approached with a datapad in hand. "Sir, we've received updated intelligence on the Kepler Junction situation. It's concerning." "How concerning?" 3 more ships disappeared while we were getting underway, including a Zephyrian diplomatic courier with an ambassador aboard. Jake felt his stomach drop. "Please tell me the Zephyrians aren't blaming humans for that." "Worse, sir. They're claiming it was a deliberate act of war and demanding that the Empire be given authority to conduct security operations throughout the junction, which would basically mean military occupation." "Yes, sir. And the Vorthak Confederacy has announced that any Zephyrian military presence in the junction would be considered an act of aggression against neutral space." Jake rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. "How long until we reach the junction?" 36 hours at maximum speed. And how long until this turns into a shooting war? Garrett checked her data pad. Conservative estimate, 48 hours. Jake looked out through the nearest viewport at the stars rushing past as the Defiance accelerated toward what was rapidly becoming a potential flashpoint for galactic conflict. Well, he said finally, at least we're not going to be bored. No, sir, Garrett agreed. I don't think boredom is going to be a problem. As if summoned by the mention of problems, Pip's voice came over the ship's comm system, sounding slightly breathless with excitement.
Captain, you need to see this.
I've been analyzing the sensor data from the junction, and I think I know what's happening to those ships. Jake and Garrett exchanged glances. On our way, Pip, Jake replied. And this better be good news. Well, came Pip's voice, it's definitely news. Jake had the distinct feeling that the next 36 hours were going to be very interesting indeed. After all, when Pip said something was definitely news, it usually meant they were about to discover that the situation was much more complicated than anyone had thought. And based on their recent track record, more complicated usually meant someone's trying to start a war. The Kepler Problem, Episode 3. You know what I love about engineering? Pip said, his ears practically vibrating with excitement as Jake and Commander Garrett entered the Defiance's engineering section. It's that the universe has rules. Physics doesn't lie, math doesn't play politics, and when something impossible happens, there's always a perfectly logical explanation. Jake looked around at what had once been a pristine engineering bay, and was now something that looked like a mad scientist's laboratory had exploded, and then been reassembled by someone with a PhD in creative chaos. Holographic displays showed incomprehensible data streams, and at least 3 different pieces of equipment were making sounds that Jake was pretty sure violated several laws of physics. Pip, Jake said carefully, please tell me you haven't broken our brand new ship.
Broken it, Jake, I've improved it, look at this!
Pip gestured enthusiastically at a display showing what looked like a 3-dimensional map of local space. I've been analyzing the sensor data from the missing ships, cross-referencing it with gravitational anomaly reports, subspace distortion patterns, and quantum flux measurements. Commander Garrett peered at the display. What exactly are we looking at? The impossible, Pip replied, his voice dropping to something approaching awe. Ships don't just disappear, right? They get destroyed, captured, or they jump to hyperspace. But in every case, there should be some kind of evidence. Debris, energy signatures, hyperspace wake trails. And there isn't any? Jake asked. Oh, there is, but it's all wrong. Pip manipulated the display, zooming in on a specific region of space. Look at this. The Centauri Dawn disappeared here 3 days ago. Big cargo hauler, full crew, regular comm checks every hour. Jake studied the data. I see the last known position, but look at the sensor readings from when it vanished. Pip highlighted a section of the timeline. There's a brief spike in quantum field fluctuations, a localized distortion in space-time, and then nothing. Could be a hyperspace jump, Garrett suggested. That's what I thought initially. But hyperspace jumps leave a characteristic signature, a sort of scar in subspace that persists for hours. This? Pip shook his head. This is like the ship just stopped existing. Jake felt a familiar chill running down his spine. In his experience, when things stopped making sense, it usually meant someone was working very hard to make sure they didn't make sense. Show me the pattern, he said. Pip expanded the display to show the entire Kepler Junction region. Red markers indicated the locations where ships had disappeared, creating a seemingly random scatter pattern across several light-years of space. 17 ships over the course of 8 days, Pip said. No obvious pattern to the locations, no common flight paths, no shared cargo manifests. The only thing they have in common is that they all just vanished. Wait, Garrett said, studying the display more closely. Are those timestamps accurate? Down to the microsecond. Why? Garrett manipulated the display, highlighting the disappearances in chronological order. Look at the timing. Ship 1 disappears at 1432 Galactic Standard. Ship 2 vanishes exactly 6 hours later. Ship 3, another 6 hours after that. Jake felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. They're not random. Someone's operating on a schedule. Exactly, Pip said, his ears perked up with excitement. But here's where it gets really interesting. I've been running probability analyses on the disappearance locations, and while they look random, they're actually following a very specific pattern. He manipulated the display again, and suddenly lines appeared connecting the disappearance sites. Holy shit, Jake breathed. The lines formed a perfect geometric pattern, a complex 3-dimensional matrix that encompassed the entire Kepler Junction region. It's a grid, Garrett said. They're systematically working through a grid pattern. Not just any grid, Pip replied. This is a standard Imperial Navy search and survey pattern. Military grade, designed for comprehensive coverage of a given volume of space. Jake stared at the display, his mind racing through the implications. Someone's not just making ships disappear. They're conducting a systematic search operation. But searching for what? Garrett asked. That, came a new voice from behind them, is an excellent question. Jake turned to see Admiral Voss entering the engineering section, followed by a woman in civilian clothes who radiated the kind of quiet authority that suggested she was probably more dangerous than she looked. Admiral, Jake said. I thought you were staying on Earth. Change of plans. The situation at Kepler Junction has become too important to manage remotely. Voss gestured to his companion. This is Dr. Elena Vasquez, our chief xenoarchaeologist. Jake blinked. Xenoarchaeologist? Why do we need an expert on alien artifacts for a missing ship's case? Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, studying Pip's display with professional interest. Because, she said, the Kepler Junction isn't just a trade route intersection. It's also the site of the most significant archaeological discovery in the last 500 years. The engineering section went very quiet. What kind of discovery? Pip asked, his voice small. The kind that certain parties would kill for, Voss replied grimly. And the kind that explains why ships have been disappearing in a systematic search pattern. Dr. Vasquez activated her own data pad, projecting a holographic image into the center of the room. It showed what looked like a massive structure buried deep within an asteroid, something that was clearly artificial but definitely not built by any known species. 3 months ago, a routine mining survey discovered this, she said. It's embedded in the largest asteroid in the Kepler Junction's outer belt. Initial scans suggest it's at least 50,000 years old, possibly much older. What is it? Jake asked. We don't know. The exterior is composed of materials we can't identify, arranged in patterns that don't correspond to any known architectural principles. It's completely inert to all forms of scanning, no energy signatures, no response to any kind of probe or signal. So why is everyone so interested in it? Dr. Vasquez and Admiral Voss exchanged glances. Because, Voss said, 3 days before the first ship disappearance, someone managed to activate it. Jake felt his blood run cold. Activate it how? Unknown. But satellite surveillance detected a brief energy pulse from the artifact's location, followed by what appeared to be some kind of scanning beam that swept through the entire junction region. And then ships started disappearing, Garrett said. In a pattern that corresponds exactly to the scan's coverage area, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. Pip was studying the data with the kind of intensity that Jake recognized as his friend's trying to solve an impossible puzzle expression. The disappearances aren't random, Pip said slowly. And they're not even really disappearances. Someone's collecting ships. What do you mean collecting? Jake asked. Think about it. Systematic search pattern, precise timing, no debris or energy signatures. This isn't piracy or warfare. This is harvesting. Harvesting for what? Pip's ears drooped. I don't know. But whatever that artifact is, whatever activated it, it's looking for something specific. And it's using the ships to search for it. Admiral Voss nodded grimly. Which brings us to why you're here. The major powers are on the verge of war because each one thinks the others are responsible for the disappearances. Meanwhile, the real threat is something none of them understand or can combat with conventional forces. You want us to investigate the artifact, Jake said. I want you to stop whatever's happening before it escalates into a galactic conflict. The Zephyrian Empire has already dispatched a battle fleet to the junction. The Vorthak Confederacy is mobilizing their border forces. If this isn't resolved soon, we're looking at the first major interstellar war in over a century. Jake looked at the holographic display showing the alien artifact, then at his friend who was still studying the data with the kind of fascination that usually preceded either a brilliant breakthrough or a spectacular disaster. How long until we reach the junction? He asked. 18 hours, Garrett replied. And how long until the shooting starts? The Zephyrian fleet will arrive in approximately 24 hours. The Vorthak forces are already in system. Jake rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. So we've got 6 hours to figure out what's happening and stop it before half the galaxy starts blowing the other half to pieces. That's about the size of it, Voss confirmed. Great, no pressure at all. Jake looked around the engineering section, taking in the mix of advanced technology and organized chaos that Pip had created. All right, here's what we're going to do. Pip, I need you to figure out everything you can about that artifact and how it relates to the disappearances. Dr. Vasquez, I need to know everything about the archaeological discovery, who found it, who knew about it, who might have had access to it. And Admiral? Jake turned to Voss. I need you to contact both the Zephyrian and Vorthak fleets and tell them that Earth is taking point on this investigation. Buy us as much time as you can. That might not be easy. Both sides are convinced the other is responsible for the disappearances. Then convince them otherwise. Tell them we've identified the real threat, and we need time to deal with it. Tell them that starting a war over this will just make the problem worse. Voss nodded. I'll do what I can. But Jake, you should know. If you can't solve this quickly, Earth is going to be forced to choose sides. And that choice could determine the balance of power in the galaxy for the next century. No pressure at all, Jake thought. Just prevent a galactic war, solve an ancient alien mystery, and rescue 17 missing ships. All in a day's work for humanity's unofficial ambassadors to the galaxy. Pip, he said, please tell me you have some ideas. Pip looked up from the data display, his eyes bright with the kind of excitement that usually meant he was on to something important. Actually, he said, I think I might know how to find the missing ships. How? Well, if I'm right about the collection theory, then the ships aren't really gone. They're just somewhere else. And if the artifact is using some kind of advanced technology to transport them, then there should be residual quantum signatures at the disappearance sites. Residual quantum signatures, Jake repeated. And that helps us how? Because quantum signatures are like fingerprints, unique and traceable. If I can analyze the patterns from multiple disappearance sites, I might be able to reverse engineer the transport mechanism and figure out where the ships are being taken. Dr. Vasquez looked skeptical. That would require technology far beyond anything currently available to known species. Good thing we're not limited to known species then, Pip replied cheerfully. The Defiance has some very interesting toys in its sensor array. Things that Earth's been working on but hasn't shared with the galactic community yet. Jake looked at Admiral Voss, who nodded confirmation. Experimental quantum sensors, subspace field manipulators, and a few other devices that are officially classified, Voss said. Consider them at your disposal. Excellent. Pip's ears were practically humming with excitement now. Give me 12 hours and access to those sensors, and I'll find your missing ships. We've only got 6 hours before the shooting starts, Jake pointed out. Then I'd better work fast. Pip turned back to his displays, his hands already flying over the controls. Jake, you might want to prepare the crew for some unconventional maneuvers. If I'm right about what we're dealing with, getting to those ships is going to require some very creative flying. Jake looked at Commander Garrett, who shrugged. Sir, with respect, unconventional maneuvers seem to be this ship's specialty. True enough. Jake activated the ship's comm system. All hands, this is the captain. We're approaching what might be the most important mission of our careers. In the next few hours, we're going to attempt to solve a mystery that has the potential to prevent a galactic war. This is exactly the kind of situation we trained for, exactly the kind of challenge that this ship and this crew were designed to handle. He paused, looking around at the faces of his bridge crew. I won't lie to you, this is going to be dangerous. We're dealing with technology we don't understand, operated by forces we can't identify, in a situation where failure could mean war between major galactic powers. But I also can't think of any crew I'd rather have with me when facing impossible odds. Jake grinned. So let's go save some ships, prevent a war, and show the galaxy why humans are the kind of neighbors they want to have. All stations, prepare for tactical approach to Kepler Junction. And somebody get me a coffee, this is going to be a long day. As the Defiance accelerated toward what was rapidly becoming the most dangerous region of space in the galaxy, Jake couldn't help but think that they were about to face their biggest challenge yet. After all, exposing a conspiracy was one thing. Dealing with ancient alien technology that could make entire starships disappear? That was something else entirely. But if anyone could figure it out, it was going to be a nervous Klezak engineer with a talent for impossible solutions, and a human cargo hauler with a talent for making the right enemies. The galaxy was about to find out just how dangerous that combination could be. 6 hours later, Jake stood on the bridge of the Defiance as they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler Junction, and immediately understood why this region was considered so strategically important. The junction was a natural intersection of 3 major hyperspace routes, surrounded by a dense asteroid field that provided both mining opportunities and natural defensive positions. Under normal circumstances, it would have been bustling with traffic from dozens of different species. Right now, it looked like the setup for the galaxy's worst nightmare. Tactical report, Jake ordered. Zephyrian battle fleet bearing 27 Mark 6, came the reply from Lieutenant Torres, their Vorthak tactical officer. 12 heavy cruisers, 36 destroyers, and what looks like a dreadnought. They're holding position at the system's edge, but their weapons are charged. Vorthak forces? Dispersed throughout the asteroid field. I'm reading at least 40 vessels, mix of patrol ships and heavy interceptors.
They're using the asteroids for cover, but they've got firing solutions on the Zephyrian fleet.
Jake studied the tactical display, noting how both fleets had positioned themselves for maximum strategic advantage, while technically remaining within their respective zones of operation.
It's a standoff, Commander Garrett observed.
Neither side wants to fire first, but both are ready for immediate action. And somewhere in the middle of all this, Jake said, ships are still disappearing. Speaking of which, came Pip's voice over the comm. I've got good news and bad news. Give me the good news first. I've located the missing ships, all 17 of them, plus 3 more that disappeared while we were in transit.
Jake felt a surge of relief. That's fantastic. Where are they?
That's the bad news. They're inside the alien artifact.
Jake blinked. Inside it? How's that possible?
The artifact isn't just a structure embedded in an asteroid. It's some kind of spatial manipulation device, probably a pocket dimension generator or something similar. The ships aren't being destroyed or captured in the conventional sense. They're being translated into a pocket of space that exists inside the artifact.
Are the crews alive?
Unknown. The quantum barriers around the pocket dimension are too strong to penetrate with passive sensors. We'd need to get much closer for detailed scans. How much closer? Close enough to potentially get sucked in ourselves. Jake looked at the tactical display, noting the positions of the 2 hostile fleets and the location of the artifact, right in the middle of the most heavily contested region of space in the system.
Commander Garrett, what's our stealth capability?
Excellent, sir. The Defiance was designed for covert operations. We can mask our signatures well enough to avoid detection by conventional sensors. What about unconventional sensors? Unknown, sir. We have no data on the artifact's scanning capabilities. Jake weighed their options. They could try to contact both fleets and explain the situation. But given the current level of tension, any unexpected movement could trigger a shooting war. They could wait for more backup, but every hour they delayed meant more ships could disappear, and the political situation would only get worse. Or they could do what they did best, charge in and figure it out as they went along.
All right, Jake said.
Here's the plan. We're going to cloak the ship and approach the artifact for close-range reconnaissance. Pip, I need you to figure out how to get those ships out of the pocket dimension. Dr. Vasquez, I need you to figure out what the artifact is and how it works. And if we get detected by either fleet? Garrett asked. Then we explain the situation and hope they're more interested in solving the problem than starting a war. And if we get sucked into the artifact ourselves? Jake grinned. Then Pip gets to add pocket dimension escape to his resume. The bridge crew exchanged glances, and Jake could see the mix of excitement and apprehension that always preceded their most dangerous missions. All hands, this is the captain, Jake announced over the ship's comm. We're about to attempt a covert approach to an alien artifact of unknown capabilities, surrounded by 2 hostile fleets, in order to rescue 20 missing ships and prevent a galactic war. In other words, just another Tuesday for the crew of the Defiance. He could hear scattered laughter from around the ship. Engage cloaking system and take us in, nice and easy like we belong here. The bridge lights dimmed as the cloaking system activated, and Jake watched the main display as the Defiance began its approach toward what was either going to be the solution to their problems or the beginning of an entirely new set of difficulties. You know, Commander Garrett said quietly, most ships get routine patrol assignments for their first missions. Most ships, Jake replied, don't have crews crazy enough to volunteer for this kind of work. As the Defiance slipped through space toward the alien artifact, Jake couldn't help but think that they were about to discover something that would change their understanding of the galaxy forever. He just hoped they'd live long enough to tell someone about it.
To be continued,